بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان.
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد شرف الأنبياء والمرسلين, and praise and peace be upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Just would like to welcome the people who have come here tonight, who are not from the community, and naturally also the people from the community. But I think one of the important aspects of opening up this community to people outside, to the larger community, because in a sense this community, like many other communities, is a community within a greater community, which is the community of the Silicon Valley, and by extension also the community of Northern California. What's happening right now all over the world is what has been termed by some analysts as the Lebanization of the world, or the Balkanization. And that is that really in a lot of different places in the world right now we're just seeing a lot of conflict and a lot of turmoil and a lot of fighting. And unfortunately, one of the things that we often see related to this, like the example that I would use is in Bosnia. When the Bosnians were being massacred there, one of the things that was often brought up in the newspapers is this is a centuries-old war. In other words, these have to do with century-old feelings that go back hundreds of years, that have to do with the Turkish invasion, and etc., etc. And really, if one studied that closely, and there was a very good article in the Ibn Reader, which clearly indicated that in fact it wasn't centuries old, it was about 4 years old, and that there was a massive propaganda that was done by the Serbian government in Serbia, and basically really frightening the Serbians in Bosnia and making them believe that if the Muslims took control they would eat your children alive. And it's very odd that as many of them fell for it as they did, and not all of them did, because there were many Serbians actually that were fighting with the Bosnians in Sarajevo that chose not to fight in an ethnic or nationalistic boundary. But I think the point of that is that unfortunately we become victims of propaganda, and we become victims of media, of mass media, and the mass media, the extent of its influence and power is really not arguable. But I just want to give an example here of, this is in New York Times on Sunday, January 21st, and it's called the Weekly Review section. And it's called Seeing Green, as opposed to Seeing Red. And basically the cover is, the red menace is gone, but here's Islam. And the eyes, I don't know if it is, they don't say it, but it says a poster portraying the Iranian cleric. So I think that's supposed to be Imam Khomeini's eyes or something like that, making them look very sinister, obviously. He was actually kind of a grandfatherly looking person to people that actually met him personally. But that's a whole other thing there. So the idea here is fear of a global spread of Islamic revolution began with the coming to power of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, and then basically the article is a very negative article talking about these horrible Muslims that are going to take over the world and make everybody miserable. And this is a theme that we're seeing a lot. And so I think one of the things that in the United States, there is really a large number of Muslims here And actually over 40% of them are actually from the United States. They're not immigrants. They're people that became Muslim in the United States. It's about 42% now is estimated. And the vast majority of those are from the African American community, and amongst those also are people that have a more Euro-American background. But also many African Americans, in fact, have Irish blood and have different ethnic diversity there as well. So the Muslims that are here who are immigrants, and this community is by and large an immigrant community. We do have African American, we have Euro American people, but certainly a lot of the Muslims here are working in the Silicon Valley, engineers and these things. And so the idea of inviting people here, and I would say that traditionally Islam has not been a proselytizing religion in the sense that it has never been a religion of what sometimes is derogatively termed Bible thumpers, or people that come banging on your door and want to tell you what the truth is and get you to subscribe to their version of the truth. Traditionally, Islam has actually been a religion that spread in many places. It spread after military conquest that took place, and certainly Iran is a good example of that. In getting into studying the details of that, and was it these aggressive, quote-unquote hordes of Muslims with scimitars raised up above the heads of the Iranians, telling them they got to become Muslim, or they would kill them. That is a Hollywood version of what actually took place, and what took place was in fact much more benign than that. And there was nowhere in the Islamic history a compelling people to become Muslim. In fact, during the Umayyad period, which is the second historical period after the prophetic period of what are called the rightly guided caliphs, the Umayyad period are the Bani Umayyah, who are people that became, they were from a tribe in Mecca, and they became the rulers. They actually did not like people to become Muslim. In fact, it was their government policy to kind of really not encourage people to become Muslim during that period. And they had political reasons for that, and there was a lot of corruption within them. And it was, in fact, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who was an Umayyad Khalifa, or Caliph, that actually broke that and wanted and encouraged people to open up the gates of Islam. And so it's very fascinating to study Islamic history, and that is one aspect. For the last 600 years, there has been a continued spread of Islam. One of the largest areas now, in population-wise, is Indonesia, which has over 130,000 Muslims. The Indonesians were never conquered by a Muslim army. In fact, they became Muslim through traders who went there from Yemen and who simply wanted to do commerce. And they were very impressive in their character and their behavior and in their worship. And the Indonesians, who were a religious people before that, mainly Hindu, were very impressed by these Muslims, and gradually they began to become Muslim. And now the country is over 95% Muslim. So it's very fascinating to see that Islam continued and continues up to the present day to spread, really not through proselytizing, but generally through interaction with Muslims and people getting interested from that angle. Now, we are, as a community, encouraged to explain to people about our religion, but there is in no way a sense that we are to compel people or to... It is really to allow people to see what Islam is and to allow people to think about it for themselves. Muslims certainly love it and enjoy it when people do become Muslim, but at the same time, we totally are encouraged in the Quran to recognize that people have the right to believe what they believe. And the Quran very clearly says there's no coercion in this teaching. So Islam is not a religion that is based on coercion, but rather a religion that is based on reflection and thinking and invitation. And the word in Arabic that is generally translated as kind of proselytizing. In fact, this means an invitation. And really that's what it is. It's an open invitation. If it interests you, then learn about it. And if you learn about it, then make an intelligent decision about it and where you want to stand in relation to that thing. And I think, in a sense, really, just in terms of why we follow the religions that we do, I think most people, in fact, there's an argument that all people are religious by nature, whether they believe in God or believe in money or believe in whatever they believe in. By their nature, we will do ritualized behavior, and our days are ritual. I mean, I see people when we go, like in the morning to pray, we have a dawn prayer. For people that don't know about this prayer, and you can pray it in the mosque. It's encouraged to pray it in the mosque, but sometimes when I'm going out in the mosque, I see the same joggers every day, and they're very religious at jogging, and it's very impressive to me. If somebody can get up at 5:30 in the morning and go out and jog, that's impressive to me. But I also recognize it as a type of ritualized behavior. When we're doing it on a regular basis. And so by our nature, we will fall into patterns, habituated patterns. And in a sense, the Islamic religion is a religion that, while it does have habitualized patterns, it clearly warns us about falling into these perfunctory modes of worship, where worship becomes routine, and the essence of worship, which is really about intimacy and communication with God, is lost. So that does happen with people in any religion, and that is certainly a pitfall of ritualized behavior, is that it becomes purely ritual and loses its meaning or its content, which is really the ritual aspect of it is only the outward form, and it's important what the ritual is filled with, which is supposed to be filled with spirit. Now, in just looking at, I wanted to look at a few meanings here in the Quran, because I think really the best place to begin in an attempt to break down the ignorance that exists about Islam and about Muslims is really to go to the sources. Now, William Campbell Smith, who was a great comparative religionist, he studied the different religions, he said that it is unacceptable, he's an Englishman, he said it was unacceptable to make a statement about a religion that was not accepted by its believers or its adherents. It's a very profound statement, actually. And I think what he was saying there simply was that when we look at religion, we have to understand the religion from the believer's perspective if we're to be fair in our assessment of that religion. And what we tend to do when we look at religions is we tend to project our own biases and assumptions about that religion on its adherents. Now, to add insult to injury, unfortunately, many times those biases and assumptions or presumptions are actually confirmed by adherence to that religion. So, for instance, when we read in the newspaper that there's Muslims are terrorists, for instance, which is very common for people. A lot of Americans really believe that. That's just their experience, that Islam and terrorism seem to go together, because we're always reading about Muslim terrorists. In fact, this begins quite clearly when Americans consider safety of the world these days. Many still seem conditioned to look for the end of the world threats that must be confronted, and goes on about just last week in the World Trade Center bombing, with a string of bombings in New York that could have killed thousands of people. The Sheikh played the role perfectly, even as he proclaimed his innocence and called himself a martyr of God. He portrayed his prosecution as a part of a new Cold War against Islam. And so, the whole idea of this Sheikh was a religious leader, literally being the mastermind between this nefarious conspiracy to blow up the World Trade Center. Now, I've been a Muslim for almost 20 years, and in all of that time, I've literally never been approached by a Muslim about blowing up anything, nor have I ever met a Muslim that was even in the slightest interested in blowing up things, other than maybe his own ego if he was a good Muslim. Because that's really, that's what needs to get destroyed. And so it's just interesting that I read about these people, and yet, now that does not mean that there aren't people like that. I don't know. There's a lot of Muslims that are really very wary about what happened in New York, just in terms of the people involved and to what extent they were involved. And there's some valid concerns there. And I think that people, if they studied that actually intensively, and unfortunately the Americans were unable to because the O.J. Simpson trial was happening at the same time, and people were certainly much more interested in O.J. Simpson than in this blind sheikh from Al-Azhar in New York, who certainly wasn't as dashing, nor was his crime as passionate. So, if there was a crime on his behalf anyway. Now, I just want to read, and for people who are not Muslim, this book is a book called The Essential Quran, translated and presented by Thomas Cleary, which I really feel is one of the best. It's one of the best as an introduction. It's not the whole Quran, and I would just say a few things about the nature of the Quran. The Arabic language is a language of ellipsis, and we rarely in English use elliptical speech. But Arabic is literally a language filled with ellipses, and it becomes very difficult to study the Quran without really studying Arabic language. And Islam, interestingly enough, is a completely formulated religion whose foundation is in the Quran, and yet the religion itself can be learned quite sufficiently without ever looking at the Quran, which might seem paradoxical, but in fact it's not. In other words, somebody can quite easily learn the basic principles of Islam and the obligations of the Muslims and practice those without looking at the Quran. But the importance of the Quran can't be underestimated, because it is the source of the Islamic teaching. And what he's done here is he's taken the ayahs that are much more accessible without commentary and without a deep knowledge of the Arabic language, and presented them as best he could in the English language. So I just want to take a look at a few verses, because I think that's the best way of looking at the Quran itself, at Islam. The first one is from the chapter which is called Women, and it's called An-Nisa in Arabic, and it's a chapter that deals with many issues that were very important at that time and remain important in terms of human relationships between men and women. And it begins by saying, O humanity, be reverent toward your Lord, who created you from one soul, and created its mate from it, and from these two disseminated many men and women. Be reverent toward God, by whom you ask of each other, and be reverent toward relationships, for God is watching over you. Now, on the verse 36, and really this is for me, a beautiful summation of really the message that Islam has. Serve God. And the word in Arabic, Allah, is a proper name. It's not really best translated God, because it really is a proper name. In the same way that you can take a person like who we can say is a man, but their name is John. So God has more of a generic idea, even in the English language, because there's a plural. You can say gods. You cannot pluralize the word Allah. And so Allah is actually, and it's also the word that the Christian Arabs use who are not Muslim in Palestine and in Iraq and Syria and those places. So it should not be alien to people in the sense that they think Muslims somehow are worshipping a different God, because it really is the word that the Jews and the Arabs, Christians of Yemen and these places use for God. And it's related Semitically to a word that shows up in the Bible itself, Elohim, and Eloi, like in the New Testament, there's phrase from Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lima lima sabachthani, which is reportedly what Christ was supposed to have said on the cross. But the word Eloi, Eloi is from the same, it's a cognate in the Semitic languages of Allah or Ilahi. And so it says, serve God and do not associate anything with God. And that really is the essential teaching of Islam. Over and above everything else is this basic idea of Tawheed, which is the unity of God. And really the message of Quran is simply that we weren't here, now we're here. Where did we come from? The message of Quran is you came from God and you will return to God. And while you're here, you should be aware of that fact. And there are two reactions that human beings have to that, either to accept it or to reject it. And this is the idea of Iman and Kufr, or the idea of acceptance and rejection in Islam, is that either we reject, that we have any gratitude to be shown towards God, or we accept that. And so the idea of serving God, and do not associate anything with God. And then the very next thing, and be good to your parents. And this is several times in the Quran, parents are related to the idea of serving God. In other words, serve your parents as well as serving God. So be good to your parents, which is the foundation of human societies, because it's through the parents that traditions, that morals are transmitted. And if we lose respect for our parents, there's no way that the traditions of the previous culture can be transmitted to the next generation. And one of the tragic examples in this country of really the disintegration of American society is an artificial creation of adolescent rebellion, which really it's a social construct. It's not a universal condition for adolescents to rebel against their parents, and it actually did not happen in the United States. It's really kind of a product of the 1950s. With James Dean, and a lot of it was in fact Hollywood, because if you watch Rebel Without a Cause, which is about teenage rebellion, James Dean had a massive impact on this culture, and a lot of teenagers wanted to be like this guy who was rebelling against his parents and shouting to his father and his mother, "You never listen to me," right? Which is certainly oftentimes a valid cry that youth have about older people, that oftentimes older people tend not to listen to them. And one of the things that I liked about St. Paul was reported to have said, children, obey your parents. It's, I think, in Corinthians. Children, obey your parents. But then he adds a little kind of twist on that old adage. Children, obey your parents. And then he says, and parents, don't give your children reasons for disobeying you. And really, we tend to forget that there's a reciprocal relationship there, that parents have a duty and a responsibility also to their children. And oftentimes that we put our children in situations where they can either be true to themselves, which often results in rebelling against the parents, or they can do what Erickson called identity foreclosure, which is where they resign themselves to the fate of their parents' decisions for what is best for them. And I think Islam really is somewhere in between, where there's actually a dialogue that takes place between the parents and the children. And there's a wonderful example of that in the Quran when Ibrahim, or Abraham, was told to sacrifice his son. He saw him in a dream, and according to Islamic tradition, dreams of the prophets are revelation. They're the same as revelation. And he, in the Quran it says, he quite literally told his son, who at that age, according to some of the commentators, was about 12 or 13 years of age, some say 7. But he literally said to his son, I've seen in a dream that I am slaughtering you. So tell me what you think about that. And so he literally asks his son to give him some insight about what was taking place. And that's the type of dialogue that should happen between a parent and a child, that it shouldn't be a monologue where the parent is always talking to the child, but it should be really something where there's some reciprocity, where there's some mutuality that's taking place, because a child as it comes into its own is a unique individual. It's really not our creation. It's God's creation from an Islamic point of view. And it's not really up to us to make spitting images of us, a chip off the old block. Right? The Arabs like to say, shiblun min dak al-asad, like a cub from that lion. And which, they're proud of that. And there's certainly children are a source of pride, and the Quran itself says, "Al-malu wal-banuna zinatu hayat ad-dunya." Wealth and children are ornaments of the life of this world. So it's saying, and be good to your parents and relatives. Again, this is foundational to human society. And to orphans and paupers. And it's really beautiful that going from relatives to orphans and paupers, because really what it's saying is, if each one of us takes care of our parents and takes care of our relatives, then really society doesn't need the state to take on all of this type of stuff. But then it says, and orphans and paupers. In other words, people that don't have a social infrastructure based on blood bonds, on relationships, whether they can take care of themselves. So don't just take care of your own, but take care of those that don't have anyone. Families and things like that, so that it extends out. There's a social consciousness that the Quran is trying to instill in human beings, that it's simply not taking care of your family, but recognizing that there's people out there who are in less, who their situation is less than yours. I mean, we have an example of somebody who was in prison, and they became Muslim in prison, and now they've come out of prison, and they don't have any place to go, and they came to the mosque. So that's a responsibility of the Muslims to help that person, because he doesn't have family to go to. He's not in a situation, and so really it becomes a social responsibility to help people get back on their feet. And then it says, and to neighbors close by. And generally the commentators have said that means to Muslim neighbors, to take care of your Muslim neighbors. And then it says, and neighbors remote. And that means people who are not of your religion but are living near you. Because obviously the bond is not the same. I mean, we have to be realistic and pragmatic about the nature of human bonds and societies. Religion is a very powerful bond. In fact, the word in Latin, religio, means to bind or to bond together. And so religion itself is a bond in and of itself. But what the Quran here is saying is that not only do you have your own people from your own religious tradition who are your neighbors, but there are also neighbors from outside of your tradition, and you should recognize they're your neighbors. And just the fact that they're your neighbors, that they have that type of proximity, that you have to be human with them, and that you have to make sure that their needs are met as well. And so it extends again, taking it beyond just that Muslims should be concerned about their own community, but also about the community at large. That there's a social responsibility that we have to Bani Adam, to the idea of the community or the family of the tribe of Adam in Arabic. It's literally the tribe of Adam, that we have an Adamic bond that unites us, that transcends religion, in the sense that we are from one father and one mother, in the Quranic and certainly in the Judeo-Christian worldview as well. And many other. Most traditions do believe in a first family, a first father and a first mother. I mean, you'll find that in almost all of the mythologies of the world. There is some idea of the first human being. And then it says, and to the companion at your side. So to take care of those who are closest to you when you're on journeys and when you're... This is all about instilling in people a sense of responsibility for people around you. And then it says, and to the traveler, to those people who are traveling. Now this is certainly more coherent in pre-ATM days, and really even pre-hotel days, when travelers literally were out on their own. And for a traveler to come to a town could be a very disorienting type of situation. And you have that in the Christian tradition, the idea of the Good Samaritan, of the one really that takes care of the traveler's needs, especially if in that case, something where there was a matter of life and death. But really the idea of taking care of the traveler still extends now in the sense that people who are on journeys, when they come to a place, in the Islamic tradition, it's encouraged to honor them. They're called Ibn al-Sabil, and which means son or daughter of the way, or the path, or traveling. And traveling is, the Arabs have a beautiful proverb that says, Al-Gharibu lil-Gharibi Nasib, that two strangers are relatives, which means that, here in America, you go to the store and you see all these Americans and you never think of, striking up a conversation. But if you're in Spain and everybody's speaking Spanish and you see somebody who's speaking American accent, you'll go over and introduce yourself. Oh, you from America? Oh, I'm from, where are you from? And you have no other reason to do this other than that you both have a sense of strangeness in the place. And that gives you a bond or a unity that wouldn't have existed had you not been in that type of situation. And so the traveler does feel strange. And the idea of taking care of the traveler is recognizing that there are people that do have this alienating feeling of just by the fact that they're a traveler. And so that if you extend and open up to those people, then you break down that feeling of strangeness or alienation and really allow for certain human relations that might not take place otherwise. And there's a good deal to learn from the traveler, and the traveler has a good deal to learn from the people that they meet on their journey. And part of traveling is really being able to break down provincialism and the idea of, nowadays in what they call the postmodern interdependent world, it's really no longer feasible for us to live in these provincial mind sets like the white supremacists who decide all to hold up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming or something. I mean, I'm not picking on Wyoming or Jackson Hole, but the idea of people that really don't want to have anything to do with the rest of the world, that is a really unfortunate human mindset, and it's very unnatural, and it's actually a result of just really bad socialization from their parents, because children naturally interact with other children, and I've seen that just in my travels all over the world, that the children are not by nature racist. At worst, they are just kind of, if a white child has never seen a black child, they might be initially afraid, or they might be initially, or vice versa. But after a very short time, once they realize, oh, this is just another human being, they just have a lighter or a darker shade than I do, that before you know it, they're playing together as if nothing ever happened. And I've seen that with my own children. And we had some friends came over whose children were very dark. And initially, my two boys, they were a little frightened. They were just, I don't think they knew, because they really hadn't seen children like that, although they'd seen adults like that. And after, initially, my little boy, he didn't want to play, and he was, no, I don't know. And then after, we just left them. And then after a short period, they're all up shouting and bouncing and just having a really good time, and he was really upset when they had to leave. And so that's the natural condition, that initially there might be some kind of, oh, I haven't seen this before, this is strange. But if you allow that to become familiar with the strangeness, suddenly you recognize, well, this is a human being just like me, and he likes to play, in the case of children, just like I like to play, and that's what happens. So the idea of breaking down these boundaries of alienation is really important. And to the wards, those who have been in your care, for God loves not the arrogant, the boastful, which is a really interesting idea, is that really that the only way that these bonds of human relations can be made amongst people of different cultures, of different tongues, of different colors, of different religions, the only way that we can really break down these barriers is through humility and through also a recognition that there's something I can learn these people. And that's why it says God does not love the arrogant, the boastful, because it's arrogance and it's pride and a sense of superiority, of inherent superiority, that really obviates the possibility for there to be real human communication between people of diverse and different backgrounds. And so pride is one of the classic flaws of human nature. I mean, the Greeks spent all their time watching tragedies where hubris or overweening pride was the thing that always destroyed the tragic hero. And so pride is a really unfortunate human condition, and it's something we have to overcome. And just being an American myself, I feel in many ways that Americans we are a proud people, and there's good aspects to that pride, but there's also negative aspects to that pride, because pride can blind you, and pride can prevent you from really seeing things clearly. Certainly, the idea of being proud of achievements and proud of a culture's benefits and values and what they've given. I think that's a healthy thing. But this is not the pride that the Quran is talking about. It's the pride in one begins to see that one is superior, that one feels that one's better, that one feels that people are less or more inferior because of some social status or some ethnic background that's not the same as yours, or because of a skin color, or also because of religion. Because while the Muslims, we are taught to believe and be proud about our teaching, we're warned about thinking in any way that because we're Muslim, we're going to heaven and everybody else is going to hell. That is actually one of the pitfalls. It's considered in the books of Islamic theology, about really thinking that you as an individual somehow are better than other people. One of the early Muslims said that the Muslim should be like dirt, which means it's humble and low and keeps close to the earth, and whatever's thrown on it, it only gives back good things. The second section I wanted to read from is a chapter entitled "The City," which is the city referred to in the Quran is Mecca, and that was the city in which the Prophet Muhammad peace be upon him was from, and it's the city where the house, which is called the Kaaba, which is called the house of Allah, which doesn't mean in any anthropomorphic terms, like we don't believe God lives there or something like that. It's simply a symbol of direction for the Muslims to direct their prayers towards this house as a way of unifying the heart. And the house is fascinating in that it is literally empty, and that should be the concept that the Muslims have of the God that they worship, that we literally do not believe in the conceptualization of God, that the human intellect is incapacitated before the concept of the infinite. In other words, that the finite mind in no way can comprehend the infinite. And so it's really a sense of awareness that we should not attempt to conceptualize God, and that we know God, according to Islamic tradition, through attributes that manifest in creation, like mercy, compassion, power, exaltation, abasement, that God is called Mu'izz and Mudhill. God raises up and God abases. But the idea of conceptualizing God, the essence of God, or the self of God, then the Muslims, we say, Subhanallah. Glory is God above anything that is associated with Him. And even the word Him and He and Him, in the Islamic tradition, we do not believe in a male God, a male deity. We believe God is literally above gender, and that is only linguistic expediency that the masculine gender is used. That's made very clear in the books of Islamic theology. So the chapter begins, and it's an early chapter in the Quran, that I swear by this city, which is God swearing by the city of Mecca, and you are a free dweller in this city. Because the Prophet, when he first came, he was persecuted, and he was literally a citizen and a free citizen of Mecca. There was no reason why they should have persecuted him. And then God swears by the begetter and the begotten, which is, some say it means Adam and the offspring of Adam, and some say it means the Prophet his own, that he was of a father who was from Quraysh. He was not an alien to the city. Surely we have created humanity in difficulty. And this idea of kabad is really that the world is a place of struggle, that it is a difficult place, and that we have been created in the midst of really struggling, that there's struggle in the world. And then it says, do they think no one has power over them, which is people who oppress other people? Do they think, just as they have power over these people, no one has power over them? So the oppressor should always be really wary, because there's always an oppressor that's going to be over him. So, Saddam Hussein can kick his Iraqi citizens around and act like a tyrant and oppressor, but pretty soon he's got bombs dropping on his head that affects his whole country, not just his own petty little nature, but it affects innocent people as well. And just like America should be aware, just like they can bomb Iraq into ashes, that there's power over America as well. I mean, Americans, even on the dollar bill, it says, "In God we trust." So the idea is that people shouldn't become arrogant, and that arrogance shouldn't lead them to oppressing other people. And this is why, and then it says, they say we have spent much wealth. And this is the idea that wealth is this thing that people think because they have wealth that they can do whatever they want. They can act with impunity. Like many people in this country, and a lot of middle class and the poor people complain a lot about how rich people, you can hire all these lawyers and get away with murder because you've got money. That people think because they have money they can do whatever they want. And so the Quran's kind of warning people about that, that just because you've got all this wealth and you've consumed all this stuff, don't think that that's going to make you independent. Do they think no one sees them? Have we not given them two eyes? In other words, just like you have two eyes to see, do you think the one that gave you those two eyes can't see you? If the one that was capable of giving you eyes can make you see, doesn't it make sense that one can see you as well? And a tongue and two lips, just like you can bear witness against others, don't you think others can bear witness against you? And we showed them the two highways, which means that we showed human beings the way of righteousness and the way of evil. And this is an idea in the Islamic teaching that literally that everybody has a sense of right and wrong. But what happens is the original nature can become perverted or deviated. And so what happens when it deviates, which in Latin literally means deviate, means to go away from the via or the way. And once you lose the way, then this is the whole purpose of messengers in the Islamic understanding, that come to show people again the path that their own inherent nature knows is true. But they have not embarked upon the steep road, the aqaba, the steep and quick ascent. And what will convey to you what the quick road is? Emancipating a slave, to free people in bondage, or feeding on a day of hunger, to feed people that need food, an orphaned relative, or a pauper in misery. Then one will be of those who believe and enjoin patience on one another and exhort each other to kindness. So the idea here is that if you want to be a believer, then do the things that believers do, but don't become self-righteous and think just because you can say something on your tongue that's not embodied in your actions that's going to be of any benefit from you. They are in the company on the right hand. But those who repudiate, they are the company on the left hand. Over them will be a vault of fire. And this is the idea of really that people, we create for our own selves our realities. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that God says, I am in the good opinion of my servant. If my servant believes good, then he will find good. And if my servant believes evil, then he will find evil. And what that means is if people do good, then that's what they find from their God. But if they do evil, then they will find the opposite of good. That's pretty much really all I wanted to say. I will briefly just explain for people that don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you do who are guests tonight, the idea of Ramadan, which is basically, in the Quran it says that Ramadan was prescribed for us just as fasting was prescribed before peoples before you. And every religious tradition really does have some sense of fasting, even including the Christian tradition, which in the Catholic Church they have the idea of Lent, and the Jewish tradition, which also has fasting, and even really if you go into Hinduism and even other more distant traditions, there's also a sense of fasting and of depriving the body of food for a period of time as a spiritual exercise. And so fasting is a period, 1 month out of the year, in which Muslims abstain from the appetites, the sensual appetites of food and sexual relations during the daylight hours. And that is from dawn until sunset. And it's a time where the Quran literally says that the reason that we have been told to fast is to learn self-restraint, to learn discipline, to learn, the word means a lot of things, but some of the meanings are self-restraint, discipline, conscientious awareness. So the idea of fasting is literally to try to make people more conscientious, more aware of their own surroundings, their own conditions. And part of becoming aware is literally becoming aware of the idea that there are people without food. And so part of not eating is to get a sense of what it's like to be hungry. Because it's actually interesting to think about that there's a lot of people that have never been hungry before. And you have people say, I'm starving. But what they meant is, I haven't eaten in the last 3 hours. It's to let us taste a little bit of what the less fortunate go through. And this is to create what some people call empathy, as opposed to sympathy. If you see a hungry person, you sympathize with them because of human emotion, if you've got a heart at all. I mean, some people obviously don't care either way. But the idea of empathy is that you've actually gone through what they've gone through, so you can, it's a much stronger feeling. And so that's one of the wisdoms of the fasting itself. And it's a time in which the Prophet Muhammad encouraged to feed other people, and the Prophet said that in this month, literally the gates of paradise have been opened and the gates of the fire have been closed. And he said that the whisperings that come from the obsessor, Shaitan, they don't have the authority that they have in the rest of the year. So even the evil impulses that people will get lessen during this month. And basically, that's really what I wanted to say. And I don't know if there's, I wasn't planning on doing anything formal, because this is actually meant to be a very informal, really welcoming for people outside of the community to get to know the Muslim community, to break down some barriers, to recognize, that, I'll give you a sad example of what ignorance does, I think. My wife has personally been, had nasty things said to her, just because she wears a headscarf and outside, and she's an American. She was born here, raised here. She's been here longer than most people because she's actually Mexican American. Like the Mexicans say, we don't have to get on a boat to go back to where we came from. So that she was at the grocery store the other day, and one of the boys was in the basket, and the bagger couldn't put the bag in, and one of the girl at the cash registers just said to her in Spanish, because she obviously thought my wife's from the Middle East, isn't that where all Muslims are from? And she said in Spanish, machucalo, which means like just ram him, which was really not a very nice thing to say about a 2-year-old baby and a thing. And my wife kind of just was really shocked, and she just said, so, I speak Spanish. And she immediately turned and went back to what she was doing. But, this is unfortunately part of really the ignorance of our culture, that America has been a very provincial place for a long time, certainly California much less so, because of the Chinese were here a long time ago, mistreated for a long time. The Japanese were here, and so we've had a lot of mixing here in California that hasn't taken place in a lot of places in the country. But despite that, there's still a good deal of provincialism that we really need to break down. The Quran says, "O humankind, we have made you from a male and a female, and made you into peoples and tribes, that you might know one another, that you might come to know one another. Surely the most generous, the most noble of you are the most conscientious, or the most aware of God and aware of the needs of other people." And really that's the criterion that Muslims are supposed to use in terms of judging people, is to just see how well they act and behave, because that's really what people should be judged upon, by their behavior and by their understanding and how that manifests in their lives, not by their color or by what clothes they wear, or if they have a turban on their head, or if they don't have anything on their head. It's just a basic kind of human recognition of the differences of people, and our differences are what makes us such an extraordinary creation. It says in the Quran, "In your tongues and in your colors, your complexions are signs of God." And it's really that bottom line. That's just what it is. It's a sign of God that there's black people and brown people and white people and yellow people, and it's a sign of God. That God has made this a really, it would be a dull world if it was all in black and white. We've got all these colors and varieties, and the same with food. Nobody likes bland food. You like food that has spice and variety. And so human beings shouldn't be any different. So I don't know if there's any questions or...
We'll open the door for questions.
All right. There doesn't have to be. Everybody's fine. Where's the food?
Yeah, go ahead.
Speaking person? Khutbah. Actually, the khutbahs are in English. Yeah. There's a lot of Arabic terms are used, but it's just learning a vocabulary that doesn't take that long. Because, like any religion, or any technical, if you hang out with computer programmers, they've got all these words, I don't know what they're talking about, Pentium 7s and, or if you go to the hospital, defibrillators and, sphygmomanometers and, it's all just technical vocabulary, and Islam has a kind of technical vocabulary that doesn't take that long to learn, and that's really what you hear in the khutbah here. Khutbahs in this country are generally in English. There are some places where they are in Arabic.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, the question just was about, if somebody doesn't speak Arabic, where can they go to learn, because a lot of the mosques, just the khutbah or the Friday prayer, and there's a type of sermon, it's like a sermon, is given. And in most countries, mosques in the United States is done in English. But there is a type of vocabulary that imams get into bad habits of not translating words, because the vast majority of people do know what they mean. So I think generally that's it. And certainly, all the literature, the books, there's a lot of books now coming out, more now than ever before, in English, that are explaining the religion and things. And the Arabs only make up 15% of the Muslim world. They're actually a minority. And, just the Quran's in Arabic, so they kind of push their weight around a little bit. But the truth is, they're a minority. And the vast majority of Muslims, in fact, are in Asia. That is where most of the Muslims are. They're Asians. Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, China, and then India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then you move into Indo-European, Turkmen people and Iranian people, and then the Arab, and then you have Africa, which has quite a few huge population of Muslims amongst Black Africans as well as the Berber, which are more light-skinned Africans. So the Arabs are actually really kind of small. And there's Islamic literature in there's Turkish Islamic literature, Urdu Islamic literature, Persian Islamic literature, Malay Islamic literature, just as Islam is becoming a religion that is becoming more prevalent in the West, and now you're beginning to get an genuine Western Islamic literature that's in the medium of the English language. And there's actually quite a few very educated Muslims coming out of Europe and America that are writing, like Abdul Hakim Winter, T.J. Winter, who's done some really remarkable work. Dr. Algar, who's at Berkeley, he's originally from Cambridge. He's an Englishman who became Muslim, and they're writing at very high levels, and that's going to increase, I think, too. Yeah, absolutely.
It says in the Quran that Allah was king when he said, "We created people, we."
Okay. In the Quran it says "we," and that is something you'll find also in the Old Testament, in the Judaic tradition. Part of that is understanding Semitic languages. Now, the question is about the plural form. In the Quran it says khalaqna, like we created, and uses the plural, the first person plural. In the Quran, the Arabic language, which is the language that the Quran was revealed, has to be understood to understand a lot of things in the Quran that when they're translated they actually become a little confusing. Now I'll give you an example. In the Quran, in Arabic, there's a type of exception that can be completely distinct from the genus of the things that are accepted from. In other words, in English, you can't say all the people got up except the donkey. It doesn't make sense. But in Arabic, you can quite literally say قَامَ الْقَوْمِ إِلَّا الْحِمَارِ. All the people got up except the donkey, because they have a type of exception that is excluded from the genus of whatever is dominantly being talked about. So in the Quran it says, for instance, فَسَجَدَ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَجْمَعُونَ إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. All the angels bowed down except Iblis, who is Diablo. Iblis and Diablo is a cognate. El Diablo, the evil one. And people would think, reading that in English, that it means the devil was an angel. But that type of exception is actually it's different in the Arabic language, and a lot of confusion actually when the Greeks translated Semitic stuff into the New Testament. They actually came up with a lot of problems. For instance, Son of God in the Judaic tradition, David was called the Son of God, and other prophets. Son of God, Ibn Allah, like the Arabs they say Ibn al-Halal, which means son of the permissible, and it's just a way of saying, he's a good guy or something like that, right? And in the same way they say things like Ibn al-Kalb, which means like son of a dog, which is obviously the opposite. They don't mean he's literally the son of a dog. They're just saying he's a bad guy. And in the same idea in the Semitic languages, when they said, Ibn Allah, they didn't mean literally the son of God. They just meant a righteous man. But in the Greek mythology, there were gods that literally had children, and so there's a lot of problems. Or like the eye of the camel, the idea of the camel going through the eye of the needle. That has different interpretations, but one of them is that there were two doors to every city, and there was a big door which was the daytime door, but then at sunset in the Semitic lands in the Middle East, they used to close the doors. And there was a small door next to the huge door of the city, and they called that the eye of the needle, because it was very small and it was harder to get through than the big door. And the camels couldn't get through that; they could only go through the big door if they got there in the daytime. If the caravan got there at night, they used to have to actually camp outside the city walls to wait till the door opened up. So the idea of getting a camel through the eye of the needle was not impossible. It was just really difficult. And that's the idea of, a rich man will not enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. That kind of, in English, sounds like it's impossible. But if you understand the kind of Semitic language that it's coming from, it's not that it's impossible, it's just it's more difficult. The gate's not as wide, right? So there's a lot of problems, but this is a very long-winded answer to a simple question. Why does it say we? And basically the reason is that in the Arabic language, when authority speaks in the plural. And this is something that we have in English when Queen Victoria said, "We are not amused." She was using what they call the royal we, because she's not just speaking for herself, she's speaking for her authority, which has to do with her armies, her soldiers, and so the idea is simply that we in the Quran in no way implies plurality. It simply means authority, that God is speaking with absolute authority. So I hope that's suitable. Oh, okay, Alaykum salam.
Can you give some more humanity, culture, and what Islam actually
Oh boy, it's getting too close to eating time. That's an all-nighter. So I'm going to really refrain from that one right now. Not because it's a bad question, it's a very good question, but because it's very detailed. It's not something that I think I could cover in a real short time. Praying through Jesus? Okay, that's a good question. I think the way the Muslims see that is we definitely believe in Jesus as a prophet of God, and as actually one of the greatest prophets. He's from what are called the five great prophets, and but we do not. One of the things that the Quran actually came to completely erase from the people that embraced the faith is the idea of praying to somebody as opposed to God. Now, in the Christian tradition, granted, there are many Christians actually believe that Jesus is God incarnate, and from that perspective, it makes sense to pray to Jesus. And if you believe Jesus is God, then you're just praying to God if you're praying to Jesus. And so from that point of view, for a Christian, it makes sense. In the Islamic tradition, it's really, the Quran actually very firmly establishes the absolute unicity of God, and that God had no partners, that God had no children, including sons or daughters. And so from that perspective, the Quran declares the humanity of Jesus. And because Jesus is a human being, then God does not want us to ask human beings for our needs, but to ask God alone for our needs in terms of prayer. Certainly in other things, if you need medicine, you go to a doctor. But even in Islam, you go to it with the knowledge that that's a knowledge that he was taught through a gift from God. And so even medicine is seen as being from God as well. So I think that's probably the difference, the fundamental difference between the Islamic understanding, which is that Jesus was a prophet and a human being, and that he was not God incarnate, nor was the Son of God, because there's difference of opinion even amongst the Christians. Some say quite literally that he is God. Others say he's the Son of God in this triumvirate, this three parts, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So I think that's probably the fundamental difference of life.